Day 1307 of the war, Trump promised to defend Poland from Russia, but the promise is very vague. The question is whether this promise is enough for Putin. If not, he will continue to check the European borders' endurance. Ukraine has lost a powerful ally. A general, Lapin, has been dismissed from the army. He has become famous for his inflated incompetence even according to Russian Armed Forces standards. It was he who led the defense of the Kursk region during the invasion, and before that had exhausted an endless number of troops in the most insane and exhausting attacks. Let's get tired of it and hope that we'll be replaced by a no less talented colonel. Over the past few days, GUR has struck several Russian helicopters in Crimea at once, and for the first time in history has destroyed B-12 aircraft, Chaika, and amphibious plane, 2 at once. Great work. In the Telegram Z segment, there was talk yesterday about the mobilized. It's been 3 years since Russia has taken 300,000 citizens into captivity for continuous service in the aggressive war. Of course, huge parts of them are already in graves, but the rest continue to fight and whine, complaining that those who fled from the mobilization zone were amnestied, while they've been fighting for nothing for 3 years. Apparently for making their mother-in-law call the police. In Moscow, they detained the mother of the mobilized girl who went out with a picket. The footage shows a woman at an age who aggressively beats up 2 police officers. Her son is likely fighting for this. ARESTOVYCH'S story continues. The AFU Brigade, the fundraising he announced, reported that it was fake and inhumane and it doesn't work with ARESTOVYCH and he shouldn't be reliable. ARESTOVYCH stated that this is an ordered informational campaign against his analysts, self-reducing 3 times. This and much more in today's fresh report, which you can support with your likes, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially with your subscriptions. Donald Trump stated he will help defend Poland and the Baltic countries in the event of an escalation from Russia. Yes, I will, the president of the US said to the reporter's corresponding question. He didn't specify in what way he would help. And you say, Michael, why would someone do such a situational thing when the reporter just asked something? Trump replied, yes, that's how it goes. You see, this is one of the most important topics right now for Europe and for the Baltic countries in particular. The thing is, Vladimir Putin is ready to launch a ground invasion of the Baltic country at any moment. The only thing stopping him is that he isn't sure if the US will help or not. Because if the US doesn't help and large European countries like Germany, for example, won't help, then Vladimir Putin sees no downsides, because quite quickly one army corps with the support of a drone brigade and some Rubicon on his shoulders could just capture Riga or Tallinn. This won't make much sense to the Russian army if NATO doesn't implement the Baltic countries' defense plans they had. That's why Donald Trump's position is decisive. Putin has already rubbed his hands when Trump came to the table, hoping he would keep his promise, including abandoning his duties to NATO. And now, he was already ready, but at the NATO summit, Trump said he loved his European friends again and that the US would meet all NATO restrictions and all previous agreements. However, in the last times when Putin tested border security by launching drones in Poland or aircraft into Estonia, Trump did not respond to that. Moreover, Trump suspected that these provocations really did happen, and that exactly inspired Putin. At least on new escalation actions, or to the maximum, in fact, to try to go to some of the European countries, the countries of NATO. Therefore, every word on this topic, especially the word of Trump, is quite important. Yes, it is still Trump, so his words are still absolutely pointless and not consistent, but nevertheless, they still have a weight, at least for Putin. Therefore, it is even more important not that Trump responds, but how Putin interprets it. Therefore, I would like some more confident actions both from the American side, as from the bloc NATO, in response to the Russian deliberate provocations of testing the borders within which NATO is ready to defend itself. Because if Putin feels or thinks that NATO will not protect its borders, then he will undoubtedly attack. Because within his concept, this will help him divert resources from Ukraine, capturing which is his main goal and dream. I told you in detail about this in a separate video. Well, in general, the fact that Trump did not become rude, that is, you know how, if Trump had responded to this question otherwise, then there would have been a problem. That is, the value here is not in the fact that Trump responded so short and clear, but in the fact that he did not respond in a different way, in the fact that he did not start discussing again, in the fact that Europe should defend itself and that Trump is not into things here. He said, yes, we will protect, this is normal. well, that is, this is better than it could be. Another answer could lead to the fact that Putin would be convinced that Trump will not do anything, and his confidence that everything will go well with him, she would increase. But let's look at this topic, and then I will remind you again of my opinion that this story about how America is ready to fit behind the Baltic countries, behind Europe in general, this is one of the key stories in the head of Putin from the point of view of taking a decision about ground military aggression against these countries. Macron also spoke and spoke for much longer, but we're not talking bad things. Now let's gradually move to Macron. In an interview with CBS News, the president of France, commenting on the frozen Russia assets in Europe, stated that we are all very attached to maintaining international rules, and these assets cannot be confiscated from the central bank. Even in a situation like this, we predict and will not do anything with these frozen assets. We have already taken them as a denial, and all the funds received from these frozen assets were used to fund our efforts, part of our efforts in Ukraine, Emmanuel Macron said. Most of the Russian assets, from around $300 billion that are frozen, are in Europe, and Macron just once again showed his rather strange partiality. He said we need international law inherited, and it doesn't specify anything specific. It depends on how you decide, how you justify them, and so on. But again, if you aren't ready to act decisively, this will destroy you. At the same time, in this same interview, a journalist asked the president of France about a statement from U.S. President Donald Trump, which indicated that European countries continue to consume Russian oil and gas. The journalist clarified that purchases happen, for example, in Hungary and Slovakia. Emmanuel Macron noted that EU countries are reducing Russian energy purchases. This is true, and we are corrected, and we discussed this with Ursula von der Leyen, and she did a lot of work with her teams to fix it, said the French president. Meanwhile, he noted that oil and gas consumptions have been reduced by over 80%, yet purchasing Russian energy purchases was not the key factor, he said. We must strengthen our support for Ukraine and ensure a more effective resistance to new attacks on Kiev and civilians, Macron added. And here, honestly, it all unites the two things together, because giving up Russian frozen assets, that's real support for Ukraine. No other thing is offered by Macron. And honestly, Macron confused me. A lot of words, no action. Talking about support for Ukraine is good, but where's the support itself? When did you last hear about the new, large packages from France? And I haven't heard any of that in a long time. Macron was the first to speak about deploying military forces in Ukraine, but no progress was made. There's always some complete inhumane acting. Macron chooses between being a pre-war European political figure and being the strong leader needed in turbulent times. He chose to be somewhere in the middle, doing nothing, no fish, no meat. This is a big mistake, one that will cost France and the Western world deeply. And more, for this irreversibility. European leaders, or rather, they don't like Western leaders at all. Because a lot of words, a lot of statements about value, little does make sense. North Korea sends troops to Russia, empties its artillery stores, and handovers everything to Russia. Iran, without thoughts, gives jobs and helps end production. China sells and sells as Russia does components for arms. What does Europe do? First, they agree for a long time on whether HIMARS could be handed over, then they agree for a long time on whether tanks could be handed over, then they look at stores and think, tanks are rotten, so they don't care, they want to hand over planes. We think everything will end quite quickly, so why hand over planes? Then we still hand over planes. We'll hand over missiles, saying, listen, let's agree with us, here are the missiles, but don't hit them. And this constant indecency, this constant unpreparedness. To go to real actions that could leave an aggressor behind, which depends on Europe's fate itself, because this aggressor is already actively attacking it from different fronts. This is what makes authoritarian leaders and dictators see the West as weak. Hope for America, hope nothing will happen, hope Fukuyama was right and the end of the story came. No, Fukuyama was not right. The fight for value, the fight for peace, the fight against the aggressor continues. This must be understood, this must be accepted. And stop doing nonsense, stop talking nonsense, stop talking about international law when Russia is disrupting it every day a few thousand kilometers from you. killing people, and you're like, oh no, there are such numbers here. We, of course, have frozen, and we, of course, partially violations of international law, because we take % of these money and transfer it to Ukraine, or rather, they are as a loan to the loan that is transferred to Ukraine, but here we are on the half shishka there, you can't do that in the critical times, everyone should stand up, unify and fight the evil in order for it not to win. In general, as you can see, yes, I am a small fan of Macron, at least for now. But as I've told you many times, Macron talks a lot, but it seems he's very busy, admits terrorists with a separate state in Palestine's autonomy. Anyway, let's move on to the Russian army. Former commanders of the Center of the North, Commander-in-Chief of the Russian army, Colonel General Alexander Lapin, has been dismissed. RBC reports about this using a source familiar to these personnel. As for the Commander-in-Chief of the North Group, it was shot in August of this year. According to the unnamed source, the Tatar Inform agency born in Kazan, Lapin will be appointed aide to the Tatars in Rostam-Menihanov, who joined the ranks on September 19 after he won the regional elections. A week ago, according to Tatar Inform, Lapin will be responsible for targeting military operations participants and their families, as well as engaged in contract service, social medical rehabilitation, and the return of soldiers to a peaceful life. This, frankly, is a catastrophic loss. Even against the backdrop of an absolutely incompetent Russian generalate, Lapin stood out significantly. What a second moron it is to just not be found. Every Ukrainian military and special service officer prayed that during another strike on the Russian headquarters, it would never hit General Lapin. That person did a lot for Ukraine. He had many gloomy overhead episodes. So at the beginning of the war, in March 2022, General Colonel awarded his own son Denis, the commander of the tank regiment, for heroism near Chernihiv right at the time the Russian army quickly fought in the Chernihiv region. In October 2022, Lapin attached a gun to the head of the mobilized commander of the company. His quote, "Traitors are deserters," plus, well, there was a bunch of matter. After that, Colonel Rumyadov said to the soldiers, "A scoundrel like you should neither food nor drink nor sleep." He got the title Hero of Russia for taking Lysychansk, for commanding the headquarters 150 kilometers from the front, and for having practically no connection to Lysychansk at all. And the number of times he's burned Russian infantry equipment in insane attacks is out of the question. Even Ramazan Kadyrov spoke about him. "It's upset," said Kadyrov, "not that Lapin is a coward, but that he's being covered top line by the commander of the general staff. If it were my will, I would have crushed Lapin Doryatov, lost Nagrat, and sent an assault rifle to the front line to wipe his embarrassment off. This is the great man lost by the Russian army. Well, since he is no longer an active general, then I think a sudden ban on his elimination can be removed and a self-propelled gun can be found. Either way, despite all his merits, he led part of the Russian fascist occupation army. Incompetence does not free him from responsibility. Let's hope that Colonel General Nikiforov, who held Lapin, will show no worse than his predecessor. After all, the land is full of talents, Russia. And before we move on to the Ukrainian strikes, there are many things to talk about today. You can support the channel financially, at least I can remind you of this. You can do this on Patreon, the link is in the description. There you choose the support level, you get the appropriate bonuses. Basically, there should be a lot of bonuses, including our joint streams with you for patrons, but unfortunately, that time is not enough. So if you want to subscribe only for the bonuses, don't do that. If you just want to support new videos, get chats for patrons, see your name at the end of the video, this is a great way. Link to Patreon in the description. And you can buy NVPN, it's a tool to bypass blocks that allows you to bypass blocks. You can watch YouTube, use Twitter, Instagram, call Telegram, and WhatsApp, go to blocked resources. In short, if you want to use the internet the way you want and not the way Putin wants, and you aren't ready to endure the restrictions he builds, NVPN is a great way to bypass them. Buy via the link in the description, thereby supporting the release of new videos. Buying VPNs and using them in Russia is still legal in the moment. Plus, we probably launched a new feature today, or maybe not, I don't know yet. I'll tell you about that later. Check out the website and Telegram bot, the links to NVPN are in the description, and we move on. Fire at the substation occurred in the town of Starodrevyankovsk, Kanievsk district. The region's operational staff traditionally claims that the debris fell. Ukrainian Ascent Project Exhale Nova Plus, analyzing the footage published by local residents, reported at least 5 strikes at the substation, and depending on the damage, it could seriously affect Russian railway and military logistics. GUR reported the destruction of Russian aircraft and showed footage, and here's what the special service writes. For the first time in history, GUR ghosts burned 2 enemy amphibian hospitals in Crimea. According to local residents, on September 21, 2025, 2 Russian anti-aircraft B-12 Chaika aircraft were destroyed on temporarily occupied Crimea. It's the first time B-12 has been hit in history. B-12 Chaika aircraft are equipped with expensive reconnaissance equipment for fighting submarines. Along with 2 enemy aircraft during the raids on Crimea, ghosts of HUR also hit a multiple-purpose missile vehicle of Russian invaders Mi-8. The armed struggle continues, they write. Meanwhile, the special unit Ghost of the intelligence agency struck another 3 Russian Mi-8 helicopters, destroying at least one of them and the radar of the Ukrainian Air Defense temporarily occupied Crimea. This is reported by Militarny. Video failures were reported by the intelligence's main service. Assault drones and special units broke through the Russian airbase and hit 3 multi-range helicopters. At least 1 drone hit the Mi-8 itself, destroying it entirely. The helicopter's destruction was confirmed by a satellite image published by the agency. It shows that as a result of the following strike, the Mi-8 was completely destroyed. Additionally, one of the strike drones directly hit the antenna, destroying the radar of the air defense Nebo. The Mi-8 can detect targets like a fighter jet moving at altitudes of 20 kilometers up to 400 meters. The Mi-8 doesn't include a unit of separate anti-aircraft systems. It provides aerial monitoring as part of the multi-level air defense system. The radar transmits information to command posts in defense zones where it enters the air defense calculations. Delay of such radars is part of a consistent campaign to damage the air defense system over Crimea. This breaches safe corridors for Ukrainian destruction funds. I told you how Ukrainian forces managed to strike Russian ammunition depots. Details now come from the General Staff of the Defense Forces, and it seems the strike was very successful. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are effectively breaking invading plans, the aggressor writes. According to confirmed information, the enemy tried to organize various munitions for the 17th Tank Regiment, the 70th Motor and Rifle Division, and timely occupied buildings in Bogdanovka, Luhansk region, as well as awarded to new occupying army active on Donetsk. They were also awarded to new occupying army active on Donetsk, no more than 19,000. Different types of UAVs. Tank trucks delivered tens of thousands of grenades and ammunition to the field warehouse, along with thousands of shots at high-precision K-14 tanks and shells for artillery. In the second case, the cargo consisted of various UAVs, Malny, Bumerang, Vandal, Novgorodsky, Horonesh, equipment, batteries, communication modules, and video sensors. On August 29, 1925, troops from ASU in Dnepropetrovsk hit a logistical point to deploy drones, eliminating massive reserves of strike UAVs from Russia's aggressor. The enemy ammunition outlast came September 18, 2025, when units of Ukraine's Armed Forces Security Service destroyed a regimental warehouse and ammunition sets of Russian occupying forces in Luhansk. Additionally, the enemy's transport equipment burned down, the results of effective cooperation. Those who find them and hit them are better every time, notes the General Staff. We congratulate them on these effective actions. As you can see, strikes are not only on Ukrainian refineries, but also on opportunities for direct logistics supply of the Russian army, including shells and ammunition. As for the front, the Ukrainian soldier Kirill Sazonov shares his understanding of the situation. Mine is very similar, plus agreed with what Mushevitz previously wrote. So I'll summarize everything. This isn't a detailed analysis of the directions, but a general description of the current trend. So Sazonov writes, friend, a review of the general situation today, a whole number of key directions. The situation is not clear. Meaning, you can see the targets, be careful with the trends, but everything can turn any way you want. The general picture can be characterized by 2 options. This concerns the key directions now. In Donetsk Oblasti, Lemensk and Pokrovskoye plus Dobropoli, however, at Kupiansk it also looks the same. Use equipment under such drone numbers in clear weather is expensive, so the enemy, i.e. Russia, effectively uses its amount of advantages in infantry, but not for frontal assaults, a wave after wave like in Avdiivka or Bakhmut. Small groups of enemy assault units are constantly looking for ways to slip between strongholds of the defense forces. If possible, they immediately encircle the ground and wait for reinforcements. This could be slow advance under anti-drone blankets. There could be attempts at civilian clothing, but the goal remains the same, not to storm the positions to the front, but to slip past and secure themselves. In reality, most of the enemy advance to today is due to actions like this. Disrupted groups are being counted, our UAVs are working on them, then remaining occupiers are being counted and dispatched to strike mobile assault groups. They do this quite effectively. But The advantage of the number of infantry is not with us, so the volume of the tasks and the number of groups are often in poor relation. Fierce fighting is ongoing in Kupiansk on the northwestern outskirts of the city. The enemy is suffering losses, meaning Russia constantly drops shrapnel across the river near the fortifications. The moment of forcing is the most vulnerable, so they don't even try to throw equipment. Infantry as much as possible. There has been a slight advance along the Lapin direction under similar tactics. They have not been able to stop this full patch and move to counteroffensive positions in this area yet. The enemy goal at this point is Lapin, Yampoli, and Dronovka. In my view, this is the most difficult situation for us right now. There will be no forecasts, there are possible options, as I warned. Under Pokrovsk, the enemy is handling not just 2 but 3 objectives at once. All forces are deployed to encircle Pokrovsk. A new offensive on Dobrapilya is underway. This self-confidence was justified by the fact that Operations Rear had reserves. For a large-scale offensive on Konstantinovka, the enemy is currently compensating for daily losses in these assaults. The third goal is to hold back the Ukrainian counteroffensive and save its 51st Army from the large encirclement. Its outlines can be seen encircled by, say, even more troops than there were, and the Ukrainian counteroffensive continues to tense up. So the enemy has to use all these powerful reserves on Konstantinovka as if they won't let the 51st be encircled, and there will be no forecast either, he writes. In short, September has become the most tense period of combat in past 6 months, and not to mention the intensity. Occupiers are trying to achieve their key goals in Donetsk region as quickly as possible without any effort. The Ukrainian Armed Forces from their side are trying to break these plans also with full pressure. The enemy is actively using their main advantage in the number of infantry, but not for stupid constant assaults. Alas, they are studying. Drones are working from both sides very actively and at a longer distance. Logistics in the 2025 war are becoming less and less effective. I'll add to myself the saying with Azov that in the directions described, things can really turn anywhere. Russia's offensive is approaching its culmination. Ukraine's defense units are working to the best of their ability. In the next month and a half, many things will be settled in this year and in the war as a whole. I don't want to run forward and make predictions, so I'll just share feelings that shouldn't be taken as predictions. If Ukraine manages to hold its borders in the next month and a half and stop the Russian troops from advancing by significantly striking Russian refineries and connecting them with Russian defense missiles, the combined Russian economic problems could lead to the end of the war at the end of this year or the beginning of the next one. If the Russian army manages to break through defense with endless infantry attacks, then Putin would only believe that his Zimara strategy will work sooner or later, and the war will last even longer but require new measures from Russia, be it a new wave of mobilization or economic decisions. Regarding other assessments, Igor Strelkov Gherkin, for example, sees a stable but smooth deterioration of the situation for Russia on the front and in the rear. However, there is doubt that Ukraine will conduct any counteroffensive this year, of which Gherkin was previously confident. Now, he writes, based on the situation, evaluating it as a stable deterioration, expected, smooth, slow, without sharp disruptions, slightly powdery, completely pointless, not significant, but cheap in terms of losses. Ukrainians continue to calmly exchange territory for time and resources, and nothing our military and military-political leadership can do about it. It's possible they don't see any need to change anything, though the situation is clearly falling into a catastrophe. As of September 2nd, Strelkov writes, there's nothing expected from Ukrainians to counter the Ukrainian offensive. I'm lost in my guesses. Maybe it won't happen at all. The former respected and dear partners have being reassigned them to the conclusion that counterattacks should not be risked against, but rather wait for the time when the social-economic situation in the Russian armed forces will significantly worsen. For now, just not allowing Russian forces to advance too deeply. Or, for example, they decided to postpone these very risked operations until Ukraine's backup troops from NATO are being recruited. I can't answer that, writes Strelkov Kirkinrunov. We don't have enough information. If the Ukrainians don't reach the beginning of the second decade of October, it most likely won't happen this year, and the intensification won't happen until spring, predicts Strelkov. Yesterday was the 3rd year of mobilization, and the mood among the troops called then was very depressing. There were a lot of texts and posts, and we might even watch them alone in a separate video. However, I want to show one mobilized note that the channel UBESH08 writes. It writes which of the state propaganda words and official individuals turned out to be true and which to be false. It's not hard to guess that the facility turned out to be practically everything, he writes. Well, let's go back to what was voiced on TV, writes UBESH08 about the services of the mobilized, what turned out to be a lie, what was mostly a lie, and what was true. First, there will be no mobilization. Lies. A week after that statement, part of the mobilization was announced. Second, Second, the mobilized will be prioritized among contract soldiers. Mostly it's a lie because the mobilized from the start were limited to staying in the zone and at the border. On the 24th, they removed us from the border, replacing us with conscripts. The longer we served, the more restrictions. For more than a year, mobilized personnel have no right to work anywhere but in the special military zone. They have no right to get officer calls without signing a contract after completing accelerated lessons. They have no right to be sent to retrained positions without signing new contracts. They have no right to be mobilized from the start. They have no right to go to the military mortuary. So we fight for payouts without a tool to resolve the personal question. The ministry pays us the payouts like contract soldiers do, but the civil organization Fondo pays the main 158,000 rubles. Also, due to personal reasons, many staff mobilized in a separate order limited anod's payments for active offensive defense, used days off and other necessary allowance for years of work, equipment, intelligence service, secrecy, and so on. Of course, this is not the ministry's policy, and after multiple complaints, Belousov and I began receiving what Chaika had. And it was not enough in all areas, but for many commanders, military units, chiefs of staff, and unit chiefs, we were the second-grade servicemen who tried their best to fight for payouts without a tool to resolve the personal question, a separate release point. Overall, it doesn't depend on whether a mobilized soldier is a contract soldier, but in all armed forces, our operational division is open from day to day to provide soldiers with leave, particularly the mobilized soldiers this year, so it came out nearly the same. Most likely it's a lie, says the mobilized soldier. Thirdly, the mobilized soldiers will serve in the second echelon and won't participate in assault actions. He quotes propaganda stories. First mobilized soldiers in our unit were deployed already on September 27-30, 2022, sending a separate rifle brigade on the 27th. The mobilized soldiers immediately took part in offensive operations over Gledar, Avdiivka, and Novoselsk in the winter of 2022-2023. The only detail that didn't reflect much into the policy of restricting use of mobilized troops. In some troop units, mobilized infantry were used only in their fortifications, fundraising volunteers to participate in attacks with written assurances of agreement. In some parts of winter 2022-2023, a significant number of combat losses among mobilized soldiers were investigated in each case, but these nuances aren't significant as these initiatives were aimed at certain commanders compared to dozens of dead mobilized Russian fighters at Gledarsk, Avdiivsk, Novoselsk, and Mesorov. What about the regiments created during the mobilization and the four significant numbers? They began to be used in offensive operations in some areas back in the beginning of 2023. It's precisely entered into practice since the fall of 2023, although these regiments really remained in the old border and remained in the second line during the winter of 2022-2023. Fourth, the mobilized units will change contractors by the end of 2023, according to Russian propaganda. This, he notes, is lie, although in 2023-2024 and the first half of 2025, several 100,000 new contractors were appointed. 5. The soldiers' monetary allowance should be no less than 195,000 rubles. It turned out to be mostly true, mobilized. It took about 9 months for regular payments to be obtained, and earned payback from the Defense Ministry and 158,000 from the President's Fund, along with parts of the added payments. Infantry soldiers received initially 180,000 rubles in total. About 200,000 received mortars, reconnaissance, and rear-range vehicles. More than 210,000 were received only by scouts, tank operators, as well as mobilized officers. Only during Belousov and the active part of the FSB, payments were set for the soldiers who served in the unit, who received some bonuses, who served in intelligence services, who worked on heavy equipment, who stole from soldiers, and so on. However, this is just me talking about our division. Most likely, there are enough regiments and brigades where mobilized soldiers don't receive any payments until the end of the SVO. So far, he writes, unfortunately, it's a justified statement. There were many other less substantial statements in the mind of the unruly mobilized soldier. To summarize, the state has enshrined only 2 issues, providing paychecks and giving clear proof that we will fight an unknown number of times. The rest is false or semi-true. Now let's add a few events to the picture. The state has amnestized those who fled mobilization beyond the border, assuming they have no help for the enemy, meaning the very 600,000 threats 300,000 patriots were understood and pitied by the ruling group. This action emphasizes until the end of the war, all the words of the importance of our goal, because these are just words and the action as mobilization was carried out by these individuals. After the mobilization announcement, there were several organization projects that the state apparatus or private operators for a while observed or continue to observe. Terms for termination of contracts under a certain term. This was CHVK Wagner, Yevgenia Prigogina, including contract soldiers from Turin. This was the SHRMZ project of the Ministry of Defense. Contract soldiers were recruited among the prisoners for 6 months. Cannot be compared to the bars, also a part of the PMC. Therefore, government officials have determined the social level of pre-war contract soldiers, short-term contract soldiers, during the period before mobilization of mobilized and new military time contract soldiers lower than the PMC pairs and volunteers. From among the prisoners, of course, Wagner was reinvented, but the memory of the justice of the workers that prevailed over the state remains. The SHRMZ project was also replaced by SHRMV. Volunteers were stormtroopers until the end of the SVO, but that memory remains. Now when people online write, "I shake the ship, we mobilize, shake the ship, we have a special, sad image, tears of Mobus, invading Mobus and so on, read the list above about where the state took it, what was done, and how successful it was." It suddenly turns out the Gazmine refused to give any meaning, giving a specific image of our future that has destroyed most of our careers, guaranteeing only earned payouts and leave. It's impossible, isn't it? By the way, the enemy didn't quite understand the meaning of the terms in this regard. That's where the drama came in. We didn't arrange the things ourselves, our workers are saddened by the outcome, ending up with their mobilized base. But did he regret it? Of course not, you've lost your mind. The moment mobilization took place in Russia, the maximum cost to avoid it was $5,000 in fines. So yes, everyone who went to mobilize was his choice. That person decided to participate in the aggressive war, to join the fascist occupation army, and that decision belongs to that person. There's nothing but death for him, and he has no choice. His sympathy for people who die every day in Ukraine because Russia is trying to destroy them. If they want to desert, if they want to surrender, I warmly support this. It's not fundamental for me to have them all die, but fundamental for them not to be in this war. So if you include a mobilized soldier who no longer wants to risk his life, who doesn't want to lose his loved ones, right, for example, go out into the forest, and they will help you desert and save your life. At the same time, if you think that the mobilized for their victim as they ultimately position receive some respect or respect for their families, then this is not the case. In the center of Moscow, in the building of the Russian Ministry of Defense, security forces detained the mother of the mobilized, who fell into a single picket on the day of the third partial mobilization day in the Russian forces. This was reported by the wife of another mobilized woman, Polina Safronova, in her Telegram channel. Then she posted footage of the delay, and here it is. The mother of the disabled was detained in Moscow. Her son was mobilized to Novosibirsk in 2022. Today, or rather, yesterday, September 21st, 3 years later after Putin partially mobilized, she left a picket for the Russian Ministry of Defense. I am the mother of a disabled man who has been at war for 3 years, who has suffered a severe injury, and who has not been let go of his home for 3 years. I am waiting for the ministry to wake up and return our guys. And everything we say and do is considered legal. Everything we say and do is considered discrediting. What the mother wants the son to return. He is not a professional soldier, he is designed for mobilization. I, like the mother, were promised in the Novosibirsk military command that the guys would return in 6 months, at most in a year. I want him to return home. 3 years have passed, we are in the great patriotic war, and the whole people is not standing in line. As you can see, you are not standing, said the woman, a police officer, in a video published in the Telegram channel of the wife of the mobilized Polina Safronova. Yesterday, the military-industrial complex was taken to court, which is held today. The court reported an offense against the policeman, as reported Polina Safronova. It was reported that Lydia was detained under Article 19.3. At the same time, the detainee, Lydia, previously stated in a video, said police officers approached her and reported another reason why she could be detained. Lieutenant Shesterkin warned me that if I go on a single, though legal, picket related to the topic of mobilization, I will be detained, she said. And of course, it's impossible not to pay attention to the name Shesterkin. Here it really is, Googling among us. On another video, Lydia reported that she tried to change the picket format, leaving only a placard with the numbers 2109, 2022, 2109, 2025 and awards, which the fighters from the front gave her for volunteer activity. And in that case, she was warned about being detained. I don't know, I'm trying to put myself in the place of mobilized people. It's not difficult, because I would never go to the fascist occupation army, but when you fight with a risked life, and at that moment in Moscow your mother circles, the cops harshly detain her. And leave the VVD, I don't know, well, it seems to me nothing but to unfold this machine gun and go look for this Shesherkin to break his skull. Well, it can't be in the head, well this is some level of patience unachievable. It seems to me for anyone, but yes, like the military literally battles for the cops to pressure his mother. Interest choice. Okay, let's diverge. You won't believe it, but the page of humor continues. As you remember, Alexei Arestovych stated that he is resuming the fundraising of the needs of the military, the Ukrainian troops, and announced the fundraising of 556,000 hryvnias for the Battalion of Unmanned Systems. 158 MBR, the military part, a 5,002. Then the next day, the fundraising decreased by 3 times to 185,000 hryvnias and decreased both in monobank and in figures on Facebook. But we discussed all of this with you yesterday. However, the story has developed. The soldiers refuted that cooperation with Arestovych, calling it a fake. This is a fake, the unit wrote in its official social networks. The unit does not cooperate with Arestovych. The motives behind his leadership are still unclear, but in any case, we urge you not to support this fundraising, not to transfer money to the accounts specified, so as not to be fooled by frauds and not to compromise the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the brigade stated. Arestovych stated in his that this is an information campaign aimed at him. If he writes seriously, online, kind people are holding an information campaign against my choice to resume fundraising for Ukraine's defense forces. Yesterday was the preparation stage, the speaker spoke. Today is the brigade statement. Apparently he also means your loyal servicemen, even though I only supported, so to speak, Arestovych's desire. Such a pity for our troops, writes Arestovych, especially the command, who on calls from above has to refuse additional opportunities to provide life and health to our soldiers and participate in political games. Tomorrow, interested individuals will be provided documented confirmation of the absence of fraudulent facts. Look after our announcements, writes Arestovych. Well, the campaign, says Arestovych, I don't know anything about it, friends, but for me, there's too much pompousness for the military, he says. This is a fundraiser that has already decreased 3 times without any company, from 556,000 hryvnias to 185,000 hryvnias. Any fundraiser is great, but saying which target campaign is discrediting my choice or how it's written is strange. Yesterday, for example, I fully supported the initiative. Even if Putin, the propagandist, is helping fund the Ukrainian Armed Forces, I don't see anything wrong with that. The main thing is that the brigades don't tell him details about their location, or else he doesn't know where he'll hand that information over. Later, Arestovych posted another post which kind of clarified the situation, but honestly, in my view, it was the worst for Arestovych, because he did not agree with any fundraising for the brigade, he just took fundraising from one of the funds. Here S what he writes and brings a document. Here S what he writes and brings a document. In summary, writes Arestovych, the 158th Brigade responds to the GRU Rodora Rubima Dobro Razum, which in particular helps military unique missile water clearing systems persistently respond, call, send requests. The second, the GRU, is headed by veterans Grigory Mamchur and Boris Vakovanets. My friend is a scientist, a specialist in water clearing systems using proper authority in this sector, a volunteer since February 2022 who experienced the most bloody battles of the war. His scientific industrial center produces these cleaning systems. The third, he refers to me, we've been collecting such systems together for a long time. The fourth, I install the collection while it is placed by the GRU itself. The collection is quickly refilling. The fifth, Brigade 158 announces a statement that Arestovych is a fraud and it isn't working. The result, Brigade 158 without a system, which the brigade persistently asked for. Laughable, we were preparing to collect just 2 more such systems, 3 in all. Here, Arestovych goes back to mathematics. In the first fundraising, 3 systems were announced. In the document he publishes, 3 systems. In the changed one in a day's fundraising, there's only 1 system. I think not that we're preparing to collect 2 more, but they announced the fundraising, saw that it was going bad and simply shortened it to, so to speak, announce, look, we've closed the fund. Although we didn't manage to close it yet, but we'll talk about that later. I'll add. Frankly, writes Arestovych, first, I command the 158th Brigade. If you still need these systems, we will collect and hand them over. This is confirmed by the GRU. Look at the text of their statement, and I am here. No one wants enough, and your cleaning gear goes to other people. Second, dear military personnel, the fundraising that I provide is filled quickly and effectively. I have 10 statements since yesterday. Just imagine before that whether you have enough courage not to get angry after receiving a call from somewhere higher. Doesn't matter to me, it's harder for you. If someone is ready, I always help, writes Arestovych. Argument for the leadership. I don't take any of this money into my hands. I don't even see any money. I only fund your banks. And not Arestovych that conducts them, but people and citizens of Ukraine who you protect. Arestovych only fulfills your needs for people, okay? He writes pompously in his third face. So the situation is as it turns out. The brigade approached a specific fund not knowing that their fundraising would reach Arestovych. This, by the way, is a very striking moment because for many brigades it's important who exactly will help them spread the message. For example, I once saw a commander disagree with my help for the brigade since he believes it's forbidden to work with Russians. I understand his position and respect it. This case occurred once among all fundings. We've already closed more than 100 fundings. But I always, when taking fundraising, confirm that the brigade and units know for sure that they are doing it to avoid misunderstanding. Here, the brigade turned out to be in a situation where, having been fighting for Putin for a long time, he is probably still fighting. I don't know what he didn't understand after his rebuttal. Arestovych is taking their fundraising to show that no, look, I'm not a Russian propagandist, I'm targeting the Ukrainian Armed Forces. The situation is evil. Hopefully, if Alexei Arestovych doesn't give up again and again, and won't refuse to raise funds for Ukrainian Armed Forces, as he did in May, motivated by the fact that he doesn't want to help the Ukrainian army since it hinders the approaching peace, he will make those who he raises known know that he is the one raising funds. Especially since he writes that he allegedly received many announcements for raising funds, and hopefully his raises will be more successful than the first one and won't increase 3 times overnight. In short, he hasn't lost his mind, and yesterday morning his fundraising raised 18,000 hryvnias. In any case, if Alexei chooses to turn the Kremlin road again into a path of support for his country against fascist occupiers, this is something that can only be welcomed. I'm just noting that it would be better if the path was honest and clear and not like now. That's how it works. It should be Putin once and for all, and the name in the public will be absolutely not Special Servicemen's or 15,000 combat units. And finally, a bit about how the Russian army is replenished and another confirmation of the deceit of the Tsar, already there. Barkov Tatiana said her son, who was on emergency service, was forced to sign a contract. Her son Belikov Denel, born in 2006, is having military service in the 69th Guards and Rifle Divisions, Unit 2511. He was called on emergency service on June 2, 2025. His oath was in the village of Kamenka. He wrote to me that he was tortured, his hands were shaking, and in what way he had no choice. He came, the battalion. Commander showed him his finger with the question, "You are signing a contract," he called the forestry. I don't know what happened, the child didn't tell me. Then he went to some staff where he signed 2 kits, 2 blanks, where, as I understand, he did not read anything from Putin. Tatiana explained that Daniel wasn't going to sign the contract, but there was pressure toward him. He appeared after a while, began writing, "I was pressured, please take me out of this unit. My son isn't going to sign the contract." Our family raises 4 children. My son is the oldest, the youngest has a 3-year-old, the child is disabled. The DCP diagnoses, so the plan for his child was not to sign the contract. Tatiana indicated that only 3.5 months of his service passed, and they have repeatedly discussed the issue of signing the contract. No need, no desire, and Danila did not. Never once did he say he wasn't going to sign the contract. He didn't want to. Let me remind you, all this nonsense about huge volunteers in Russia, it's all nonsense. Russians are now recruiting in very clear ways. One of the largest reinforcements is any detainees who are being sent or who have scales to pay for contracts. Second, they're conscripts. 30% of conscripts work for contracts. Some get beaten, some get threatened, some get fooled. But there's no willingness to do all this. Russia is just actively trying to camouflage itself. It works. Anyone who wants to figure it out or look for information will immediately come across dozens and hundreds of such assessments, rather than people being dragged into the army as a deceit. Meanwhile, they're being held by nullification, beatings, pitfalls, and threats. This is how the Russian army works. This was Michael Nacke with you, and see you soon. All the best. Goodbye.